Welcome to the Spiritual Geek Podcast, Wisdom for Modern Times, where we focus on living with intention to consciously create a life you love and celebrate. I'm your host, Sheila Franzen, and I'm so excited to share another episode with you. Today, Rebecca Eldredge has joined me for a discussion about remaining present and engaged in social justice change-making without sacrificing your well-being. It's a handful, and so we'll look forward to diving into that. For 2 decades, licensed psychologist Rebecca Eldredge has focused on integrating multicultural issues into her work with clients, university departments, refugees, graduate students, and organizations. As a therapist, speaker, coach, and facilitator, she shares her mental health training and passion for social justice in service of those who give so much of themselves to others. Her work centers around the importance of compassion and well-being to maximize impact and wholehearted living. Rebecca incorporates neuroscience along with the importance of understanding emotions into how we take care of ourselves and each other, engage with difficult conversations, and improve relationships and systems to be spaces of inclusion, belonging, and safety for all people. She completed her MA and PhD in counseling psychology from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and taught adjunct in the University of Houston's and Our Lady of the Lakes graduate psychology programs. She's also a Step Into Your Moxie certified facilitator. So welcome, Rebecca. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Is there anything else you'd like to share as we dive into this conversation about yourself, your journey, your path?
No, I'm looking forward to seeing where this conversation takes us.
Awesome. So one of the things that stands out to me actually as I read your bio and the word that really spoke to me as I was reading it again just now was the word wholehearted living. And I just think that's such a beautiful way and intention to talk about living, like wholehearted. Like, how do you describe wholehearted living?
When I envision or try to embody that wholehearted living, I'm sure Brene Brown does a better job of actually articulating and defining it. And I think she even uses that term in maybe one of her books. But it's that living with your whole being and being connected to the feelings, to even the deep and intense feelings, as a part of what inspires you, what moves you, what motivates you. Sometimes that's things that are scary and that takes risks. Sometimes it's the things that are joyful and celebratory. But it's really being fully embodied in your life and all that you're doing in ways that feel uniquely you.
Like, I love how you describe that. And, I think that there's so much of that word that, like, even when I read the intro to the podcast, right? Living with intention to create a life you love and celebrate. Like, we can't do that if we're not willing to be wholehearted in how we live. That is what we're trying to do, right? That's where the fun, the joy, the peace, the love comes out of wholehearted living.
Absolutely. And it comes up so often in my conversations with clients or even groups or teams within organizations where there's this illusion or this myth that somehow people can divorce themselves from all of the negative, all of the heartache, the fear, the anger, the sadness, and just have the positive energy and the enjoyment and the excitement and the happiness and the contentment and, all of the things that we label as good feelings and none of the feelings that we label as bad feelings. And yet wholehearted living, intentional living, as you said, really incorporates all of them. And they all have value and they're all a part of the human experience.
That I have this conversation a lot And I've had it a lot with my teenagers who are,
Mm,
going through that phase of life of trying to
mhm,
reconcile the amount of emotion that I think comes up as a teenager, just because of what being a teenager means, right? Our brains
mhm,
are changing, our bodies are changing. We're going through all of that, and then you bring in all the social aspects of being a teenager, and you just want to be happy. And
mhm,
the habits of our society are the instant gratification and
mhm.
the feel good, right? Like everything that's targeted everywhere is the good part of life. But
Right.
man, when those tough feelings come up, if we haven't learned skills and be willing to have the capacity to hold those hard emotions, they
Mm.
come out in not great ways. They make life
That's
a
for
lot
sure.
harder.
That's for sure. And it doesn't end with being a teenager. Or for that
No.
matter, it doesn't even start with being a teenager. I know I'm having these conversations with my 6-year-old about her big feelings. And so, yeah, it's important to figure out how to relate to and even trust those sensations and the wisdom that they hold.
And just even be willing to acknowledge them. Yeah, so that's the first thing, and so it kind of brings me back to the topic that you had, mentioned for this discussion, which was remaining present and engaged in social justice change making without sacrificing your well-being. And so when I think even just this aspect of wholehearted and the contrast of emotions that we're talking about, that remaining present in these really challenging topics that you're talking about with social justice and creating change around social justice or just change making in general, to stay present with, what do we do with all this? For many of us, I think there is a level of frustration, and struggle with the some of the things that are going on in the world and in the US and in our political system. And I don't
Mhm.
know, sometimes I feel it in our school systems and in our cities. And
Mhm.
if we're living life in any of these places, like I just this concept of remaining, like I understand remaining present, but I do find sometimes it's so easy to get wound up in my head, right, around
Mhm.
these battles. And I always know peace starts within, right? We're not going to create world peace by, you know, world peace is an inside job. So this aspect of remaining present, to create, you know, peace and stay engaged, because I know personally, I often, excuse me, I often, it's funny that I'm losing my voice trying to speak this out loud. That's interesting. Um,
Mhm.
I disengage, right? Because there's a part of it that's easier to disengage because of the challenge and the battle I want to go into sometimes to fight for things that are, just basic human rights. And so, like, where do you even dive into this conversation of like remaining present to stay engaged? I think that for me is the thing that stands out the most, is just how do you even stay engaged?
Yeah. Well, it's a big one, and certainly what you're describing is, uh, so common and something we're finding that way to stay engaged without becoming overwhelmed, right? And I see so often the conversation comes up because the people that I'm talking to or working with are already burnt out or exhausted or depleted because they've been going full speed into the advocacy, the change making in their communities, in their workplaces, and in their families sometimes. And they go because it is so urgent and they're so motivated and they're so upset by the way things are, and they see how important it is for things to change and how the current systems are hurting loved ones, people that they care about, sometimes themselves and their family members. And by going full speed like that, then they've expended all of their resources at the expense of their own well-being. And now it's not that they're choosing to say, okay, I'm going to take care of myself for a few minutes. It's like there's nothing left. And so often the starting point for these conversations that I've had with clients is that is a kind of a crisis moment. Like now what? Now I'm so depleted, feeling so exhausted that I can't show up with my family in the ways that I want, let alone show up in my work the way that I want, or make a difference in the way that I care about. So a lot of times it really comes back to part of why I've focused more on moving into speaking and facilitation, and even a small group like Chrysalis, is to try to get ahead of that curve and be able to help people learn some different ways, expand how they show up to be present, as you said, internally with themselves, with their own emotions, with the anger or the fear or the heartbreak that's driving the change making. But how do you tune into that and care for that within yourself in a way that continues to empower your actions, so that those two are wedded together, rather than feeling like it's an either I'm taking care of myself or I'm showing up to make a difference in the world, which I think is this dichotomy that's been perpetuated by how poorly we do overall as a culture at understanding and working with our nervous system.
I'm like, yes, that is a very poor thing that we have entrained and ingrained, particularly in North America. Our drive for success and our focus on movement and doing and all those things, right? So coming back to this aspect of nervous system, and you mentioned that we end up in these places. So what are like, I think, having been somebody who's been in burnout maybe too many times in my life, because I do feel like I'm a change maker, and I approach and tackle things with like no fears for the most part sometimes, but I do end up burnt out and exhausted. So what are those early signs of overwhelm, burnout, and compassion? I love compassion fatigue. It's such a beautiful phrase. Like, I always know when I'm there, but I definitely have trained myself to ignore those early signs. How do you describe some of those early signs?
Well, actually, I help people to learn to recognize their own unique early signs, because it's not the same for everybody.
Mm,
The clients that I've worked with, like it can look vastly different. In some cases, the early signs can be that they're actually speeding up and like hyper productive, hyper focused, doing more and more and more. And in other cases, it might look really the opposite. It might look like, oh, things are slowing down. It's harder to get
mm,
out of bed in the morning than it usually is, or even like a pattern of, oh, I'm staying up later at night because I'm so desperate for that time to unwind, that that's the only time that I'm getting it, but now I'm not getting enough sleep. And so for a lot of people, it's really about learning to tune into. And one of the things that is a lot of fun is to help people make their own nervous system map, because then they start to recognize their unique cues and clues of when they're dysregulated, when they're not in that state where they're feeling really kind of calm or connected or clear thinking, motivated without overwhelm. And recognizing then, okay, what's the contrast to that? So what does it feel like when you're there, and how great it feels to recognize and connect to some of the things that help you to move consistently back into that state. but then to also be able to recognize, oh, here are some of my signs when I'm moving more and more out of that state. And then when you're like, for me, and this has been happening recently, so I'll be honest, but one of my signs is that I do get really extra clumsy when I'm in more of a state of stress, when I'm in that rushing, which is for me also one of the risk factors of tending towards burnout. And I don't always feel like I am the most graceful or coordinated person by any stretch. But the other day, just like lifting something up off the table, and I jammed my hand against the wall, it's like that wall did not just move. Believe it or not, that wall has been in the same place for a really long time.
Yeah.
And yet in this moment, I'm like, grabbing my hand and also kind of laughing at myself, because those moments to me are like, okay, so these moments are happening more frequently in a row. What am I doing here? And how can I shift how I'm living, how I'm approaching things, so that I'm moving back to that state that not only feels better. I mean, it's not just that it feels better when people are in what's the ventral vagal state, but it's that is the state from which you can think clearly and creatively and problem solve and communicate effectively and even read other people's communications more accurately, where your whole body is more healthy and functioning, and the organs are doing kind of their process of working together in coordination. And so there's so much good that comes from being in that state, which, when we're talking about change making and social justice work, we absolutely need all of those faculties in order to be effective in a sustainable way.
I love that you share I love the different examples of it isn't one size fits all. That's the aspect of getting to know ourselves and recognizing, like the clumsy, right? I start dropping something or running into things. It's like, wow, my nervous system is so done. I can't even navigate in physical reality, right? Like I hit that point too, and I'm like, oh, look, there I am dropping stuff all over the place today. But rather than just go, oh, I'm tired, of like really recognizing, it's also a way of being disconnected, right? We're disconnected from our body. We're disconnected from that aspect of our wholehearted living, our paying attention to our emotions. And like the one that, as you were talking, and I've thought about this lately, but I hadn't thought about it in the way you just said it, which really hit home for me. I've always been an introvert, and I've always enjoyed my time alone. And as a parent with a family, that looks very different, right? Like, even though my kids, have been in school for years, I don't know, there's still a way that there's just an aspect of you're like always engaged, right? You're like, I don't turn my phone off because, the school might call, or like, I don't like, there's just ways that you become a parent, and have become so engaged in that aspect of extroversion, like all the time. And so I always have been a good sleeper, but and I continue, and there's always more than one reason, right? Like, I'm not saying this is the only reason, but I am very aware that often at night I might lay there an hour or two, and it's almost like as I relax and I read, and, I might be learning something, or, I spend my 10 minutes scrolling Facebook, and then I read my book, and I'm like, I'm being an introvert. Everybody else is asleep, and I'm getting my own unwinding time. And it's like, that's not the right time to do that, because then I actually wake up, because I'm like, oh, I'm re-energized. I've had time alone. And then I still don't go to sleep. And I'm like, like, that's not working. So that's just a really nice awareness for me to go, oh, I need to spend some of that alone time unwinding intentionally not doing like I've been better at exercising and walking and moving energy and all those things, but I'm like, just that time of like, do whatever I want in my own brain. And it's not about
Mhm.
family or cooking or
Right.
this or that or the next volunteer thing. Like just
Yes.
doing that during the day so that then at night I actually want to go to sleep. So thank
Mhm.
you. That was a really good awareness.
But yeah, I'm so glad. That's such a great example of identifying just how, like, whether we're paying attention to it or not, our bodies are constantly looking for what they need. And that's the risk when we become disconnected from it, is it's still needed. We're just not tending to it intentionally. Now it's going to come up in other ways.
Right. And like I feel like I'm pretty aware typically, but I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
that's why I'm doing that. Like like I knew that's what was happening, but I hadn't put it together in that
Right.
way. So
Right.
it's making
Yeah.
me laugh. Okay, fine. I'll do that in a different way now going forward and see if I don't fall asleep a little easier. So
Mhm.
that's awesome. Um, so social justice, right? This aspect, like
Mhm.
I want to know, how do you define social justice?
Mm. Well, I did not practice my definitions before this
I know.
call.
I always go to definitions. So it's fun for me because I think like social justice is that word that we throw around, right? It's like,
Mhm.
oh, well, I need to take care of
Right.
social justice is important. And
Right.
um, it
Well,
is absolutely. But I'm always curious, like, how do you define it? What does it mean to you?
mhm. Yeah. What it means to me is environments, systems, cultures, workplaces, communities, whatever form that is in, is having those spaces be welcoming and beyond fair, beyond just a tolerance for differences, but really where everybody is being treated with this respect and consideration the for the amazing person that they are, and where there's not these differences in treatments, whether overt or covert, based on somebody's skin color or somebody's sexual orientation or somebody's religious or faith background or somebody's gender or somebody's gender identity, or like all of the pieces that I focused on multicultural issues beginning with my graduate work over 20 years ago, and that includes all of the different aspects of diversity that make up and intersect in who we each are. And so when I talk about social justice, it's really inclusive of all of those different aspects and moving towards the spaces that are affirming, that are really affirming and valuing of all of those different parts of who somebody is, and that are being fair, just, equitable in welcoming people in and tending to those interactions, to those relationships really that can develop out of that.
That is such a beautiful definition of social justice. And like for me, it brings it to really these basic tenets of life, right? Like often social justice, I think it instills in a lot of people almost a battle, right? That you got to fight for people's rights. And what you're really speaking to is just this honoring of an individual for the unique, beautiful being and soul that they are, right? And that every
Mhm.
aspect of life in this wholehearted living, right? Whole person living is whether it's the community, the school, whatever it is that we can just spend more time, like when I think about it, for me, it's like spending more time focusing on the individual and getting to know them than, um, what comes to, like, I'm hearing this, it's like, we've ended up with so many belief systems and roles and labels in our societies, right? Like, oh my gosh, like labels drive me insane. Right? And because I think we've tried to use labels to describe so many things, and we lose track of just trying to connect and understand and respect and honor each other. Um, and let go of all the labels, right? It's like that aspect of coming into our own and figuring out who we are and our identity. You almost have to let go of some of all of these belief systems and things we get so wrapped up in. So that aspect of social justice it's almost like just fighting for getting to be your own person.
Mhm. Well, and hearing you talk, I'm hearing you reflect some of that back. I'm thinking about that's why I think that maybe you just hit on why sometimes I'm kind of baffled by the outcry against social justice.
Hmm.
You know, even in my local community where I live, we've made national news for not good reasons around some incidents in our local school system that happened a few years back, and that were really, really atrocious. And out of that, some of the community, some of the leaders rightfully got together and said, the fact that students in our schools thought this was okay clearly is an indication that we are not creating an environment that is really, truly creating an environment of inclusion and belonging for all of our students. And so they wanted to put together a proposal or a document, an official school board document saying basically that we stand for creating environments in our schools that are safe and inclusive for all of our students. And the amount of opposition to that, I mean, from people who are standing up saying, well, I'm not racist, but you're trying to, insert CRT and brainwashing into our schools, right? The opposition saying, I don't believe that, but I don't want to say that I support inclusion and belonging. It's like this two-sided thing. And I think that that's why it does a lot of times feel like, and unfortunately sometimes require moving into, more where what seems like it could be as simple as saying, can't we just appreciate and value all people? And even the amount that I have learned from people who are different from me, right, is so much more than the amount that I've learned from people who are similar to me. Like that's been such a privilege in my life, the people that I've been able to connect to and learn from, who have let me into their worlds that are different than mine. And to me, I think, why wouldn't everybody value and want that? That's my ignorance or my naivety right there, right? But then like you said, like sometimes it does get to be more of a battle because of the opposition to that. And that if you want to continue to stand for social justice as we're talking about it, then it does take a lot of energy and consistency and action in order to be able to move these mountains that are opposing it.
Yeah. And yeah, the mountains that we have created around so many topics in our world and environment today. It's like if we could all just, like what I'm seeing right now or being shown is this aspect of like, like looking, it's like trying to step out of the situation. I'm, Eckhart Tolle and being the observer, but I'm like almost like seeing Earth right now and just this aspect of looking down on Earth at the 8 billion people, almost 8 billion people that are on the planet. And, it's a natural aspect of course, we're going to have lots of opinions and beliefs and labels and communities and all of those things. And yet, if you can look and see Earth as a whole, you realize we're all in the same place, right? Like we're we're all going through the same journey, being a spiritual being in a human body, and trying to understand our emotions and our responses to things and our hearts. And
Mhm.
we don't have to see these microcosms of insanity that we've created on the planet when we can step up above it and just see, you know, like being all in it. And it's so simple, right? Like, but like we're all here and we are all the same from that perspective, right? Like we're
Mhm.
all the same in that we're all here navigating our journey through life on this planet, and um focusing on commonalities and similarities versus focusing on the differences. uh I don't know, it feels like it's such a simple concept, but goodness, it's a hard one in our minds that want to
Mhm.
find our uniqueness through our differences instead of finding our uniqueness within realizing the ways we're all connected and the same.
Mhm. Yeah, that was beautifully stated. And as I'm hearing you say that too, I'm just thinking about how much emotions have to do with what connects us, that common
Yeah.
experience. And so how I see sometimes people that are struggling to connect to others or to empathize or to understand somebody else's struggle are also in a position where it's hard for them to bring compassion, empathy,
Hmm.
and understanding to their own struggles.
Yeah.
And so, again, just centering back on how important it is, how essential, really, in order to connect to others, to be able to also connect and tune inward toward those wise inner guides that we have of our own sensations and emotions.
Right, because that aspect of emotion that you're talking about, energy, one definition is, energy and motion, right? Or
Mhm,
emotions give us, it gives us information.
mhm,
And it's what we do with those emotions that play into our connection, our mental health, our taking care of ourselves,
mhm.
our ability to actually then try to create change, right? And although sometimes as I say that, I'm like, maybe sometimes we focus too much on the actual change making, and what we need to focus more on is um, wow, what would be I guess what I'm trying to, or what I'm seeing or trying to say is, like, trying to change others is actually never going to get you anywhere in some ways,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
Like we have to change ourselves and how we see the world and how we interpret the world, and we can inspire others. But in some ways, it's almost the pure nature of using the word change making that creates a battle, right? People don't want to be changed.
Right.
Um, people, if people are that the people we probably have these moments of wanting to change the most are the people we need to have the most compassion and understanding for, because it's, if we're that stuck in our struggles, we don't want to change, right? What we need is understanding.
Yeah, and the nervous system has so much to
Right.
offer there too, right? Because of course, like as soon as I feel defensive, as soon as I feel like somebody's trying to change me or telling me that I'm wrong in some way, I'm no longer in the state from which I can be receptive
Right.
or use my critical thinking skills and be self-reflective and aware, right? So it is tricky because while we can see the necessity of change, and I mean the stakes are so high in people's
Hmm.
lives being being lost, being taken. We're not
Hmm.
talking about something insignificant here.
No.
And so there's so much energy and passion around the need to do this. And yet, in order to bring more people along, it has to actually, from a nervous system perspective, have ways to have these conversations in ways that feel safe enough that differences can come to the same table and be talked about and expressed and heard, in order to actually form, again, back to the interpersonal relationship. Even to change systems, we still have to change it through the individual people that are making up systems or casting their votes for the leaders within those systems.
Yeah. And like safety is the word that stood out for me of what you were just saying, because like we don't want to change because we don't feel safe, right? People don't want to change because something doesn't feel safe. They've been triggered by something, and safety comes back to a nervous system, right? So
Right.
this whole, we talk to, I love your connection and your how you bring in this aspect of being present, right? And the aspect of our nervous system and our mental health and knowing ourselves. Because if we really want to create a more connected world, in a world of change making and social justice, what we're, like I just keep seeing, it's like this bigger, more connected world, right? It's not a more disconnected, isolated world. It's a more connected world as we look at the earth. People have to feel safe. And so, yeah, that aspect of safety is such a huge, you could have a whole nother conversation around safety, I think, because so
Absolutely.
many things trigger our nervous system into not feeling safe.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we have even the epigenetic and intergenerational effects that we carry forward. So yes, that could be a whole nother long topic in itself.
Yeah, those patterns and behaviors, and then I would wanna, have fun with, we bring all that in, and, like, it affects all of us, and then where are we still as individuals within our own family systems and our own cultures and communities, right? I mean, that's the all so much gets lost in this aspect when we talk about social justice of, like, fighting for groups of people because of the horrendous things that are going on, that we start to try and separate groups being better or worse than other groups, or right and wrong, and individuals within groups. And when you did shared your definition of social justice, it's that, like, all people, it's not about getting treated equal, but just that all people are honored and respected. um I loved in one of your videos on your website, actually, like, one of the notes I took was, you grew up learning that every single person is worthy of love. And that, it was junior high that you started to go, wow, not everybody treats everybody that way. Right. And
Right.
it's like,
A little late to my
but
realization.
yeah. And it's like, I had a realization in high school, like I had wanted to be a teacher all my life. And then I had this realization. I was like, man, people really aren't kind to the teachers. I like don't want to step into that.
No.
Now I've stepped into
Mhm.
being a teacher in other ways in my life. But
Mhm.
yeah, it was that awareness that this is this world does not operate in a, we say these things, but we don't always act them out.
Right.
um, So, yeah, it's this continuing to bring voice to these things and focusing. I love that you bring your focus back to helping people remain present so that you
Mhm.
can stay engaged in this concept of social justice change and social justice awareness. It's almost like, I almost love the word social justice awareness, because it's part of it is just trying to bring awareness to where there isn't social justice, right? Because you can't change it if people aren't even aware that we have a problem.
Right. And I think you've alluded to this a few times. Like, we can't get caught in just the language of what we call things when we're actually talking to people, but knowing what we're about and what we're doing it for, and how we need to take care of ourselves, since we are the tools. We are the only tools that we have in order to really build these relationships, have these conversations, and make a difference.
Yes. So bringing us back to then, I think that's a great actual way to probably find a path here to close our conversation, which is the that's what you're doing, right? That's what your whole focus is with your small group work and your individual work and your speaking and your inspiration is, helping people, reminding people to come back to this taking care of themselves and through their path of change. So if people want to connect with you further and work with you and learn more about what you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would love for people to contact me. I love to have conversations, hear what resonated with you or any questions that you might have. And they can either contact me through the form on my website. There's a contact form there at RebeccaEPhD.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. And so welcome to send me a message there. And if you want to join my weekly email encouragement, inspiration, kind of self-care newsletter, then you can do that through my website as well.
Thank you, Rebecca. And your website is what?
RebeccaEPhD.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining me today. It's been fun and quite has me thinking about some things of where I may have disengaged and not been willing to, stay present in my own journey of things that or how I can bring more awareness, right? And still take care of myself. So thank you. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you, Sheila. It's been great talking with you about all this today and your listeners as well.
Thank you. So you've just listened to the Spiritual Geek Podcast. Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed the episode, be sure to share a comment and a rating on your favorite podcast platform. If you were inspired, consider sharing this episode with friends and family. Love and light to each of you, and may your day be filled with joy and wisdom as you consciously create your life.